Welcome to Authors at Drucker. I'm Dave Specht, Senior Fellow at the Drucker School of Management. At the Drucker School, we aspire to become the global meeting place for the world's most influential business-owning families. This conversation today represents progress in our achievement of that objective. Authors at Drucker is an interview series where we feature top authors that write about issues impacting business-owning families. Authors at Drucker is made possible from the generous sponsorship from the James E. Hughes Jr. Foundation. The foundation is dedicated to advancing the study of family governance and generational well-being. We at the Drucker School feel very aligned and very grateful to Jay Hughes and his foundation. On the last Authors at Drucker, we featured Andrew Taylor, author of a book called Launch, A Guide to Getting Unstuck, Navigating Life, and Thriving. If you missed that interview, please check out our YouTube channel for the replay. Today I'm joined by Pierre-Yves Donzé. Pierre has been the professor of business history at Osaka University's Graduate School of Economics since 2016. He's also a visiting professor at the University of Fribourg, Switzerland. He's the author of a book called The Making of a Status Symbol, a Business History of Rolex. I have it here with me. I've been studying over the last week or so. Pierre, welcome to Authors at Drucker, and thanks for agreeing to come talk about your book.
Hi, Dave. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here today and to talk with you.
Thank you. So, as a part of your academic work, you've been studying the watch industry for a long time. Can you share with us a little bit about your early fascinations with the watch industry and how that interest has evolved over time?
Yes, to make it brief, I would say that first, I'm a Swiss national. I was born in La Chaux-de-Fonds, which used to be one of the most important cities for watchmaking. So for me, it was a natural environment to see watch companies and so on. And when I started studying history at the University of Neuchâtel in Switzerland, there's lots of interest of my professors about business history and watchmaking, and then this is how it started. And then I wanted to understand this industry as a historian, not as a professional businessman.
Okay, so I have to ask, what kind of watch do you bear?
Usually I don't like to answer this question because you don't make many friends. So I have a lot.
Maybe we could strike that.
Okay. You make only one friend, and lots of enemies.
That's true. So before we get into the book, I have one more question to ask you a little bit about your own journey. I'm fascinated specifically by family business histories and their evolution, their resilience, many of their kind of near-death experiences throughout the generations. When did you know that studying and teaching about business histories could actually be a viable profession? Because there's not a lot of people that have necessarily know that a business historian could be a path,
Yes, we always need to defend our profession within business schools or faculties of economics, because it looks more scientific to have, equations and big data analysis. But what we argue in business history is the importance of contextualization. And I'm sure for family business, this is something very, very important. You cannot understand just the situation in an enterprise just looking at big data and models. You need to contextualize because it impacts a lot on decision making, on how strategies are decided, implemented, and so on. Think about political risk today. I don't need to explain that to an American scholar, how it can impact very fast on all the business conditions. And this is history. It's just the context of making business in a specific country, in a specific time.
Well, I know particularly for our audience, many of them are leaders of large family businesses and advisors to those family businesses. So your writings are particularly important for them because they want to learn from the past. They want to learn from the best, and they want to learn the true stories, of how did they get there. And oftentimes those stories are are glamorized and shortcut, and I appreciate the way that you've dug into the history and shared with us some of the ups and downs and the inflection points, and we'll get into some of those as we talk more about your book. So Rolex is one of the most iconic luxury brands in the world, and everyone recognizes it. So before we talk about Rolex, I think it always starts with a person, and I'd like to talk about Hans Wilsdorf. What can you tell us about him as a man, maybe his upbringing, and how he came to develop the Rolex brand?
Yes, he's a very important entrepreneur, and he has something very specific within the leaders who develop watches. So he founded Rolex in the Rolex company in 1905 and registered the brand in 1908, so early 20th century. He was a salesman. This is the most important. He was not an engineer, not guys from techniques and production. A salesman, German origin, so born in Germany. He learned business, sales, and then moved to Switzerland to be a salesman in watch companies in the UK, especially in London. And this is how it started. So it shows the importance of sales in this story. And it's something quite transnational from the beginning. He was not a Swiss going to a market. It shows that how this industry was transnational from the beginning. And why being a salesman was so important? Because he knew the market. It's so as simple as that. Other big companies in Switzerland were dominated by directors focused on production and production technology. To produce the best products would mean that you're able to sell them. But Wilsdorf had just the opposite view, making a brand. So he knew the market, he knew what consumer wanted, and he tried at his best to answer these needs.
Do you know anything about his parents or his upbringing that maybe influenced his path as an entrepreneur?
We don't know so much about his family. He comes from quite a wealthy family, engaged in business, in commerce in Germany. But he lost his father when he was young, and then he migrated to Switzerland. We don't know much about him. I think there's not so much papers anymore, and anyway, Rolex doesn't open at all archives. So it's kind of a bigger mystery about his origins.
Okay. So Rolex is a very recognized brand all over the world. In the early days, the focus, you talked about Hans being a salesman, but in the early days, it seems that they were focused on the precision timekeeping, the patents. There was kind of, this rush for, the patents specifically and owning the technologies. But then there seemed to be two big advancements that started to set Rolex apart. One was the hermetic seal that which would keep dust and water out, and the other was the self-winding capabilities. Can you talk about those innovations and maybe how they started to create distance for Rolex from the competition?
Yes, a point in watchmaking until late 20th century was to be precise. If you have a precise watch, you would be a luxury watch. It would be the more expensive, because precision was very important for a watch, which was a precision instrument, a useful good. So this is a starting point. And then for that, so you need to be very precise, but not only, you need to protect also the mechanism. Mm-hmm. This is the idea of the waterproof and the dust-proof watch. And second is that, in mechanical watches, you need to give energy to the mechanism to work, so you can have a hand to load energy to your spring by hand, or you can have the self-winding movements. And Wilsdorf contributed to both innovations. It's especially important to understand that at the same time, the shift from pocket watch to wristwatch. And for wristwatch, it's even more important to protect from dust and water because there's more stress from the environment to your watch. And this is why Wilsdorf was important. He's a guy, for a salesman, talking with consumers, and he knew how people used their watches, what were the problems, and so on. And he understood this is a way to make a distinction with competition, not only to be one more precise watch, but a special one. And as you said, he developed lots of activities. He was not an innovator himself, but he worked with his suppliers to develop a good waterproof case. And then he purchased their patents and went to the court against counterfeiters. So he had really a very strategic idea to develop this product. But what is important, this is a model which we call oyster today. So oyster, yes. It means waterproof in some sense. And what is important is that during the interwar years when this model was developed, actually Wilsdorf didn't know it would work or not. So at the same time, he developed a lot of other products, a broad range of models, launching them on the market, hoping that one would work. And it happened that it was the oyster. But now, if you look at the narrative of the companies, they made him a genius who had one day this idea to develop the oyster. But it's not as simple as that. He was a businessman. He didn't know about the future. So he tried to do something different to answer the needs of consumers and developed many products, and one worked. So he was lucky, but he took risks also to develop different new goods.
So were there any points in history where the company was in real jeopardy? I mean, I know there were world wars, there were tariffs where he relocated. I mean, those may have been a couple, but were there any points in time where it was like, this might not work at all?
Actually, not so much, except because the company was very, very small until World War II, during this building phase. So to survive, you needed to sell products, and was always a division of work until early 21st century between two companies. Actually, Rolex is one brand who used to be owned by two companies, a manufacturing company and a sales company. Wilsdorf is from the sales company, which took power. But first, the manufacturing side was very, very strong. And it was strong. For example, in the US, Rolex was, as a brand, was registered by the manufacturing side, not by the sales side, because it had more power. And this side had lots of small crises before the war, because they used Rolex brand for the UK and British Empire. But in the US, for example, they worked with the Grün watch, which used to be a small family firm from Cincinnati. And this partner had lots of crises, bankrupted during the 30s. So it was a very important shock. In Germany, Rolex had other partners to sell their watches with many other brands, and they lost lots of consumers during the 30s and so. So the 30s was a very shocking period, and the only survivor was Wilsdorf, actually, who took power. So it's a bit complex, but this is, I think, a turning point, the 30s,
I have to believe that during those war years, the early 30s, the luxury watch market would have been tough, wouldn't it? Maybe not. I don't.
It's very tricky to call it luxury watches, actually.
Okay.
Because it was not the idea of luxury as we have today. It was more high precision watches. So and the price on average, which if you look at purchasing power of population, was much lower than today. It was like for middle classes who wanted to buy a very high precision good. So it was a useful product. and it's still so the market was very toughly touched by the crisis, because if you rely on middle classes, the consumption declined a lot when you have a crisis. If it's real luxury, rich people would always buy luxury goods, whatever is a condition. But in the Swiss watch industry, until recently, real luxury watches were exception.
Okay. So did the market change, do you feel like then? You're saying that the luxury, quote, luxury brand is fairly new. Rolex was mostly meant as a precision watch that a middle-class person could aspire to have. It wasn't out of reach. I mean, now it seems like many of Rolex's watches are truly for the very wealthy to be able to wear. But when did that change? When did that shift?
The shift occurred in the 60s.
60s.
And Rolex was one of the first brands in the world in all luxury sectors to invent this new trend that I call accessible luxury. It's expensive, as you say, for wealthy people, but it's not only for the happy few. It's accessible for upper middle classes. If you really want to have such a product, you save money every month, and one day you can buy one. No, it's not only for billionaires. And this idea transformed Rolex. The idea now it's a luxury good. What is a luxury good and not a precision instrument? It means you don't talk about the technical specificities of the product anymore, but you tell a story about your brand. What many brands do today, but in the 60s it was completely new in watchmaking. What was important was not the product; it was the people who were buying it.
So was that an unpopular shift when Rolex really turned towards marketing and just the popularization by these incredible partnerships with well-known people and spending a lot of money on advertising? How was that received in the watchmaking community that was probably still really focused on precision and focused on the mechanics of the timepiece? Do we know
At
about
first,
that?
yeah. At first, nobody cared so much because Rolex was still small. So, it was just a small company with a strange idea. In the 60s, all brands still talked about how precise and how good they were. But Rolex talked about how cool people were using their brand. So it was, a growing brand with a specific message, but the other companies didn't care so much because they were focused really on the production side, on technology and innovation.
Yeah. So one of my favorite things to focus on with multi-generational companies is their resilience. They overcome, just in your book, I read that, there were huge tariff issues and that actually caused Hans to relocate where he lived, correct?
Yes.
He was in England, and because of tariffs, he moved. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Yes. As I said, he was a German. He was born in Germany, immigrated in Switzerland and in London, and he became a British citizen. And he organized his business from London to the world, especially to British Empire and to Asia. And then during World War I, to pay for the war, the British government increased tariffs and introduced taxes for companies, income taxes on all of your business around the world. Even if you don't sell a watch in UK, you must pay taxes for that in UK. And so it was bad to keep a worldwide business in London because you need to pay too much taxes. And to avoid these taxes, and also to avoid the custom taxes, to import to UK to re-export was not a good business anymore. So Wilsdorf had the idea to relocate directly to Switzerland, which had low tariffs because of the fact that Switzerland didn't go to war, there was no need to pay for the war, and he was close to his suppliers. So that's how he moved to Geneva, and he stayed there all his life.
So right now, we're in the middle of lots of tariff talk, especially in the United States. And what can we learn? What can business owners learn from Wiersdorf's experience with tariffs where history may repeat itself? Are there any learnings in there for us?
The idea is always a way to escape from that, but what is very specific here, that he was based in the country. The situation is very different from today, because it was the idea of the British government was not to attract investors in UK. It was just to use the fact that London was the center of the world for business, and to get some taxes from these sellers that use London as the capital of the world. So this is quite different from today. And what business leaders can learn from history, this is exactly what I said, that contextualization, it's too simple sometimes to compare completely different situations.
Okay.
But the idea that showed Wiersdorf is that what is important first was not the place where is based your company, is what really you do as a business. But it has changed in the watch industry, for example, because the country of origin now is very important. At that time, it was not. So moving a company was easy.
Okay. So I'm also very curious about the family elements of these multi-generational businesses. Hans himself did not have any children, but he had, it sounds like he had a few nephews and nephews-in-law that played some role in Rolex throughout the history of the company. One example is Dieter Kubel. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right.
Mm-hmm.
He's a German national that lived in Geneva and was appointed authorized representative in the late 50s,
Mm-hmm.
And then was a director after Hans passed away in 1960. But then, he was mostly in a secondary role. Are there any other interesting family components to the Rolex story that you find noteworthy?
Yes, what is very interesting is how to keep alive a company when you don't have children. Wiersdorf had really this sense that keeping his company after him, keeping company alive, was very, very important. So he did two things to promote a nephew from Germany. So he invited him to Geneva. He trained him in different companies of the group. And what is interesting also, he asked him to take his name, to add his name, Wiersdorf, as a second family name. So it shows really the envy to pursue the company after him. But as he understood, it's, in the world of business, if you are not here anymore, if you don't have children, you don't know what will happen. So he created a foundation, the Wiersdorf Foundation, in 1945, 15 years before he passed away. And he gave Rolex company to this foundation. And the objective of the foundation is to keep forever the property of the company. It's impossible to sell it. And so there's these two ways to keep alive the company. But the transmission to the nephew was not very good. Just as you said, after Wiersdorf passed away in 1960, he was not appointed the next CEO. There was at the same time 6 directors, but not heads. There was no CEO. So it shows very well that the new owner, the foundation, was not maybe very happy with the choice of the nephew. He was probably not able enough to manage the company. And there's another director, the sales director, Heiniger, who became the new CEO. And the family side, interesting, Heiniger stayed for nearly 30 years CEO, and his successor was his own son.
Okay.
So he didn't create the company, Heiniger, but he made Rolex number one. He was a guy who shifted to luxury. He was a guy who made the US the most important market for Rolex. And due to this power, he was able to appoint his son, who was a business lawyer, engaged in finance, etc. a lot. But the son again was not very successful. He left the company during the Lehman shock, during the global recession, when Rolex probably lost lots of money. And those are the two family elements within Rolex. So it doesn't succeed a lot through generations. So there's not an overlap between companies and the company and families. The company, even if it's not listed, it continues to live as a family firm to some extent.
Yeah, and I'm glad you made that distinction, because I think there's two parts of succession or continuity. One is ownership succession and the continuity of the ownership, either within the family or within the foundation like Wilsdorf created. But the second is the management succession, management transitions. And with many family businesses, maybe there is a successor, but oftentimes there's non-family leaders that come in and play a really important role, perhaps for many years, or perhaps they represent kind of a bridge until the rising generation of the family is more prepared, more ready to take the leadership role. Now you're located in Japan. I wanted to pull on a thread here of Wilsdorf's nephew potentially taking his name. Is that happens in Japan quite a bit too, doesn't it? When there's not a successor, there's adoptions.
You can adopt, but usually when you adopt a son, very often he gets married with your daughter. So there's not only a change of name, but you can also adopt a son like that as your new son. It's not the case so much any longer. It used to be during past centuries a lot. Because in traditional Japan, keeping the name of the family firm was important. Yes. It's not only selling it, but that's why you can adopt a son to keep the name of the family and the name of the company at the same time.
Japan plays such an incredible role in the bigger global story of family businesses because of the longevity of some of the companies there in Japan. That's probably for another day for us to talk about, but I'm fascinated.
This is a fascinating story. Yeah. It's a country in the world with the largest number of long-lasting companies, and most of them are family firms with lots of techniques, as you said, to survive in difficult times. And for Japanese firms, for all family firms, and for Rolex also, what was also important for survival, as you know better than I do, is that to understand and to recognize the limits of the family. If we don't have the resources to manage by ourselves the firm, it's sometimes hard emotionally to understand your weaknesses. So we accept that and we appoint someone from outside. But ownership and management can be separated. And this is what happened with Wilsdorf. Maybe Wilsdorf himself, we don't know because we don't have documents, but he wanted to promote his nephew, and the emotional side was very important. And he was probably not able to understand that the nephew was not able to manage this big company. So tried to promote him, but the new owner understood the limits and took time trying to find a way to separate ownership and management. And in the Wilsdorf Foundation, to finish with that, there's still a family side. So Wilsdorf Foundation is the only shareholder of Rolex. They distribute a part of the profit to lots of charities in Geneva. But there's some rules, of course, to manage the foundation. And one of the rules said that you still need to give some support to the family of Wilsdorf, to Wilsdorf family, and to the offsprings. So he was thinking about that. Maybe we can separate ownership and management, but I think in a long term about the family.
He wanted to create a perpetual benefit for his family, but wanted the company to survive. Yeah.
Exactly.
Let's continue on pulling that thread of leadership. I'm always curious about, these leadership transitions and also governance within these types of organizations. We alluded to the leader, Andre Heiniger, and in the book you talk about his willingness after Wilsdorf passed to want to still elevate Hans and lift him up as the figurehead for Rolex even after he was passed. And I don't know if that was humility, or was that a sense of he was just an incredible brand builder, and he knew the story of Wilsdorf would be more powerful than trying to, pound his chest to say how important and how good of a leader he was. Do you have any insights there?
Yeah, I think the second point is the right one, and I explained that a bit. So Heiniger was always in the shadow. He kept himself in the shadow. He nearly never answered any interviews. It's very hard to find in all the world's newspaper an interview by Heiniger. There's a few in the US, but it's nearly nothing. So he didn't like to talk to the media, but it was also a strategy, was to make Wilsdorf a genius.
Mm-hmm.
I use the idea of the triple excellence concept. It's Rolex is an excellent watch made for excellent people by an excellent guy. And the excellent guy was a genius, Wilsdorf. And without this idea, it was developed, this triple excellence concept in the 60s. And this is Heiniger, who never talked about himself, but made Wilsdorf a genius. Like the Steve Jobs of the watch industry. No, he had this idea. I want a new watch, which is a Rolex. It's a genius name. He had the idea in the streets of London one day. The brand will be Rolex, and I will make the Oyster, the waterproof perpetual watch. So he had this idea, like a very Christian way, a genius emerging, making the best watch. And this is a good idea, I think, developed by Heiniger. But close to that, we don't know exactly how it was all constructed. Mm-hmm. But there's the American advertising company from New York, J. Walter Thompson, that worked very closely with Heiniger to develop all of this new storytelling.
Let's talk about that now, because when you think of Rolex, you definitely think of marketing. I mean, you think of a precision timepiece, but Rolex is about marketing, at least in the United States. I don't know how it is all over the world, but in the U.S., the marketing is really what stands out. Are there any marketing campaigns or kind of promotional things or partnerships that really stand out to you that moved the needle for Rolex to be able to truly become an iconic brand?
Yeah, this is the change is important. Rolex and J. Walter Thompson collaborated since 1945, but at first they promoted techniques and precision. Mm-hmm. The 60s was a transformation of advertising in the US, kind of cultural transformation, when advertising companies stopped talking about products and talked about users. There's a very famous campaign of Pepsi Cola, the Pepsi generation. So
yeah.
Coca-Cola was talking about how good, how tasty was the Coke, and Pepsi talked about the drinkers, which were cool. And it's the same way that happened in the 60s with J. Walter Thompson and Rolex. One day in the early 60s, some guys managers from Geneva arrived in New York with their new product and showed the American partners what they had invented. We have a new product with new techniques, innovation. We want to communicate on that. And the Americans said, no, stop talking about all this innovation and technique. We don't care about it anymore. We have a new idea. You need to talk about presidents, about sportsmen, and about fabulous people. that are your consumers. And after they organize everything, the American explains the Swiss, now you need to send letters with advertisement personalized to all American CEOs in Europe. Working for the subsidiaries of American firm, and to offer them a watch, trying to make this link. So it was not completely natural. When the Submariner, one of the most famous models of Rolex, still today, a diving watch was invented, they contacted a military from the Navy in the US, in UK, to offer them with watches. They contacted important divers. So they built this relation with famous users, after to use it as an expression that the best people use it because it's the best watch.
Yeah, it's like an association. So if you want to be associated with success, you're wearing a Rolex. So I think there was one with maybe a president and another with ambassadors or something like that, if you have something to say at this, I don't remember what meeting it was, but he'll probably be wearing a Rolex or something like that.
Exactly, and there's a famous ad in American media. You can just see an arm with a Rolex taking the red phone. So it's just written the president watch. And but this is the late 50s, early 60s, and in the 60s with social change. And so the American side, the G. Walter Thompson's guy, explained Rolex that it's finished talking about politicians. Military leader is finished. Is old. Nowadays, people don't care. They're not attractive anymore. We should use people from art, from sport, and from business. This is a positive image of success. Yes. And this is how it shifted to tennis first, and golf and so on.
Very interesting shift.
To women, later to women, because it was, today it's these issues so important, but Rolex was really a gendered product. It was for men, and all the discourse and narratives on men, they're very male values, this idea to be strong, to be successful in business and so on. But again, if the New York side of the business explains the Swiss side that you need to do something for women, because also businesswomen, there's also women that like success, they identify themselves with success. And this is how Rolex started to make the same collection, the same designs for women to answer this need.
Yes. So if you had to summarize maybe 3 or 4 key elements that allowed Rolex to survive these generational transitions and to rise to the level of the #1 watchmaker in the world, what would you say? What would you say are the key elements? Maybe we covered them, but what are some of those?
I think there are 2 major elements. First is the strategy of the company, and second is the organization. So if you start with the strategy it was made in the 60s, is this triple excellence, to make an excellent watch for excellent people by an excellent entrepreneur. And we don't need to talk about that. It's a fact. And this is why after 63, Rolex basically stopped innovating and developing new designs and new models. Because if you argue you achieved perfection, you don't need new models. Otherwise, it would need the previous models were not actually excellent. And it continues until now. That's why CEOs still today don't talk to media. You don't need to talk, you just need to look at the product, it's the best, and it's finished. So it's a very strong strategy, kept in a very long time, for more than 60 years now. And it makes the message very powerful. No change, consistency. And the second element, which makes this consistent strategy possible, is the organization. The organization is the ownership by a foundation after the death of Wilsdorf. Why is it important? You don't have any pressure from financial markets.
It's true.
Nothing. You can think in a very long-term perspective. You don't need also to distribute profit to shareholders. You can keep it and reinvest. So Rolex is completely independent since 50, 60 years from banks, from financial
Yeah, that's almost
markets.
an unfair advantage.
Yes,
You know?
but for a long time they didn't distribute. No, the owner, the foundations, they give it to charities a little bit, and you keep it and you reinvest in financial products, in real estate to become richer and richer. And when they need something for the development, they pay anything cash. They need to buy a supplier, they pay cash. They need to buy anything, they pay cash. And it's possible to have this long-term consistent strategy. So that's why I think strategy and organization are the two key elements, and they fit together. For most other companies, not only in watchmaking, but in many companies, when you're a new CEO, you want to do something different. You want to show that you have the right strategy. So let's change something, a new position, a new product, and it can succeed, but it's a risk to fail. And anyway, after the brand image can change a lot in a long-term perspective.
So the question is, maybe this is like what came first, the chicken or the egg? But what came first, the organization of the foundation, or this incredible leader, Andre Heiniger? Because, and maybe it was the perfect match of, not having to share profits outside of the company with many family members, having this very long time horizon for investment, unlimited time horizon for investment, because the foundation owned it. And then you have a leader that seems to be so deferential to the story of Hans. So, what came first? What was more important, or was it just the perfect storm of those two?
Yeah, it's a perfect match, but if you look at chronology, the foundation came first. The foundation was founded in 1945. And Hans Wiesdorf was managing at the beginning the foundation, appointing members and so on. So that's why they could also capitalize profit for 15 years during the term while Hans was still alive. But the strategy was not decided, implemented, and constructed yet. And so, but I think this, so the foundation board was looking in the 60s for the right man. So it's not a chance that, it's a perfect match, but it's not a chance, because Heiniger became CEO in 64, and Hans died in 60. So for 6 years, there was no CEO.
That's incredible.
Different directors. One is a nephew. And so we're looking for the right guy. So that's why it's not a chance to have a perfect match. So we're looking, and what did Heiniger do during this time? He's taking control on the US subsidiary, which had lots of autonomy. And the US was becoming an important market, but they had their own models, their own designs, and even their own advertising agency. Only the American subsidiary didn't use J. Walter Thompson. And Heiniger understood, if you want really to have this powerful message, we need to have it everywhere, including in the US. So I take control of the US subsidiary, and he appointed as a marketing director of Rolex America a guy from J. Walter Thompson to make the link. So he showed the foundation he was the right man. No, it's not a chance. And after in 64, say, okay, you can, please take the seat of the CEO.
So I'm curious. I mean, it seemed like the marketing got consolidated globally. Did they use very similar marketing campaigns all over the world, or were they regionalized?
It was regionalized until the early 60s, and it was the job of Heiniger to make it really global.
Okay, yeah. There's so many interesting parts to your book. We can't cover it all today, but are there any other learnings from this journey you took into the the depths of the Rolex story that you'd like to share as kind of some closing remarks before we finish?
Maybe one more point, especially if we think about family business. It doesn't look very family business. It's more the survival of a company when you don't have successors. But we talked a lot about the sales company, but also manufacturing company, which was a bit less important, Rolex Manufacturing, which was purchased by the sales company 20 years ago. But it was a family firm with 3 or 4 generations. And it was a traditional family firms looking also from proper managers from the next generations, etc. So it's also an interesting story itself, even if it's a much smaller. It was a provider of watch movements to Rolex in Geneva. And it was purchased by Rolex Geneva, by the foundation in 2005. For a reason that we can see very commonly in family business is when the new generation had no interest to manage a manufacturing company, because when you get rich too fast, the new generations don't want to be engineers, but they became medical doctors, lawyers, and so on, without any interest for manufacturing anymore, and they had the opportunity to sell the company to Geneva. So there's also, within this big story of Rolex, a traditional family business side.
Well, and I think there's other family business threads within the competition that throughout history, some other family businesses did not succeed in the watch industry, and that also allowed Rolex to probably take some market share or things like that. So there's the good and the bad, and the challenges and the opportunities with family business. As far as the watch industry goes, is it still fairly dominated by family-controlled companies, or are they mostly public? Do you know?
Both, actually, public companies, except Rolex. Swatch Group is public, but family-owned and controlled by Hayek family. And this is the problem of this firm, as arguing in other research. Now is the third generation is coming at the top of the company, but they don't have so much ability to manage luxury brands, and it's a big weakness. Richemont Group, Cartier, owned by Rupert family. So it's listed but controlled by Rupert family. LVMH, which is important also in the watch industry, is also family firm. And lots of other, you have Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet. These independent high luxury brands are family owned. So families are everywhere in the watch, and generally speaking, in the luxury industry. But there are 2 levels. The level of the traditional family firm, like Audemars Piguet, Patek Philippe, when her family over generations manage a company, and the big luxury conglomerates that are controlled by families, but not from the craft and the production side. It's from
not
finance.
Managed.
Yes, okay. It's on another level.
Very good. Well, I really appreciate you doing the work to put this book together. I'm sure it was not easy. Writing any book is difficult, but getting into the details of all the history and finding sources must be a real work. So, Pierre, thank you so much for joining me on Authors at Drucker and for making these stories of iconic brands like Rolex accessible to everyday people that are just curious about them. So thank you so much.
Thanks for the invitation, Dave. It was really good talking to you, and I hope your listeners will like this interview.
I'm certain they will. Thank you, Pierre.
Hey. Goodbye.
Pierre, thank you so much for joining us on Authors at Drucker today and for making these stories of iconic watch brands accessible to the world. I hope you'll join me on the next edition of Authors at Drucker. I'll have the opportunity to interview Mark Anglesian, the author of Stakeholders, the intersection of human beings in the ecosystem of business. I hope you'll join me for this conversation, and I appreciate you investing your time with me on Authors at Drucker. We'll see you soon.